getting really good at this point. And so if you want to kind of bring us into about the storm and what's happening here.
Yeah, this is really the meat of the book. And I say that to say the rest, chapter 1, all the way building up to chapter 5, when we're in chapter 6 here, was basically the perspective shift. Now we're jumping into, if you have the perspective shift and understanding it and shifting your mind to understand what we were talking about in the other chapters, which is that builder of all things is the owner. We operate as stewards. And when you capture that stewardship, you start opening the door of your, almost like what your belief system transfers from yourself to a higher power, right, into God himself. And that allows your heart, the soil of your heart, to be more acceptable to what God's trying to do. It's kind of like becomes, your soil's ready for the seed and fruit for God to work in your life. And so we wanted to really establish, when I say we, just, people I've talked to, the experiences I've had, me and my wife, when I was writing the book, I wanted to really establish, that first. But in preparation for this part, is which I call battling adversity, is really the meat of the book, because people, businesses, pastors, parents, that's a lot of P's. We battle adversity every day. You can't ignore them. And what I've experienced, I've done it, I see people do it. We want to categorize our adversity and call it a storm naturally. Hey man, I'm going through a storm.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot. And so, but listening, especially in business, was able to really pinpoint this. And then also now paying attention to life, is that depending on what kind of adversity you're in is based on how you'll respond to it.
That's
so
right.
you can't respond to each adversity the same. And so I wanted to take and really look at a storm, through my experiences I shared in the book, just growing up in the Midwest, and the type of storms we would get. Man, we got those Wizard of Oz storms, those like we get tornadoes. I remember when I left to come here to the islands, that, there's this town called Washington right outside, 10 minutes from my city, got wiped out with one of the greatest tornadoes in the Midwest in a very long time, very historic. Some of my friends' homes, it was all over the national news, and the storms there are just crazy, and so, but looking at a storm, man, and I referenced that to like the adversities I go through in business, through life, through marriage, through friendships. There's all these different challenges. Like storms, they come a lot of times when you don't expect them, and they're typically out of your control. They're not something that's caused by your decisions, by people. You don't have, people are saying that the government's creating these storms.
Sure.
But in reality, God is allowing them. It's how the earth operates. They're going to come, they're going to go. You got to be just naturally ready and prepared. And however it hits, one of my favorite movies is Twister. The old Twister. The new one was pretty good too, but just, they come in all different forms, and your job is to survive it. That's all there is to it. But the battles and adversities we face in life, I don't think it's wise to categorize it always as a storm. So in where we're going in this book, the next 3 chapters are vital on categorizing and discerning what adversity are we in. And so I broke those out in 3 categories, 3 pillars, which I call the storm, the snake, and the smoke. And so this chapter specifically is those adversities that are out of your control, like a storm. So to set this, podcast up, to set the chapter up in this next 3 chapters, was being able to discern and categorize it first. So what?
That's good.
So you know how to respond to it correctly, right? How to respond to it practically, how to respond to it spiritually. Even spiritually, there's a different way to respond to however the adversity is, right? And so just to set the stage for this chapter, that's what this meat we're getting into is like, okay, any adversity you're facing in life or business, this applies. You know, to look at it and say, okay, which category is it? Which one is it? Are we talking about something that's out of my control? Or are you the snake, which I reference as the deceiver, the liar? I mean, we hear the word snake, and that's why I use it, is because we think of, like, you know, the enemy, the devil, you know, the snake in the Bible. And so when you meet somebody who's kind of like a deceiving type, oh, he's snake-ish, you know, he's kind of snake-ish. So
normally it's a people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Normally it is a person
Yeah.
who, when, you know, you discern, we'll talk about that in the next podcast, but, you know, when somebody's after attacking your character or coming at you, you know, in a snakish way, we'll call it right now. And then the last one is the smoke, is when it's self-inflicted adversity, when you really can look in the mirror and say, did I start this fire? You know, kind of deal. So, and the smoke, we'll talk about that. But very important, and even in the book, I have this kind of like interlude that describes everything I just shared, so to set the tone for the next 3 chapters. So when you're going into the storm, I want you to embrace categorizing it like of its own adversity, so you understand how to respond it, because you cannot respond, or I would advise you to respond to the snake like you would a storm. I wouldn't advise for you to respond to the smoke like you would a storm in these adversities. So that's just to set the stage of the interlude, you know, and interlude this podcast before we start talking about the storm of where we're headed. This is the challenges of life. These are the tornadoes. These are the big rainstorms that are trying to take you out, trying to make it so, you know, the things that are out of your control.
You would say that a storm is normally something that's out of your control, out of your hands, something you can't really, you know, control. I mean, you have no control over this thing.
Yeah, good example. I'm in residential construction. I own a residential construction company. We rely heavily on putting together architectural plans, submitting them to the city and county, and getting permit approvals. Permit approval, usually 3 to 6 months. But when that delay kicks out to like 2 years, and that's, to me, a storm being created. There's different levels of the storms that we'll talk about, but that's, to me, that's out of my control. There's certain things I could try to help control that, but there's just a point where you're like, man, there's nothing I can do to change the situation. And what's unique about the storm is it's God allowed. God allows storms. That's the foundational part of the approach to a storm, is understanding that if God allowed it, that's a great foundation to start. Like, it's in his control. And that's the hard part as a human. We want to control everything. But when it's out of your control, whose control is it in?
When you're talking about the differences with the storm, snake, and smoke, there was one particular quote in here, Richie, that said, storms aren't punishments or proof we're off track. They're just life happening. And I think the two things here, or the one big thing here, is that the recognizing what it is so important, because, again, it gives you the guide on how to respond to something. Can you kind of talk about that? Yeah,
so don't get me wrong, God is definitely the control of the storm. Sometimes he'll use storms to wipe you out, and not to take you out, but wipe, meaning, maybe wipe is kind of a word for take out, but what I believe God wants to do with a storm is shake your foundation. And what happens when there's a shaking, I know this in construction, if you have a solid foundation and there's an earthquake, you hoping everything built on top of that foundation stands. So when God has storms, he's typically trying to shake your whole being to see what stands, because when that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with things. I mean, it's challenging, it's hard, it sucks, but now you get to see what didn't work, what you got to work to fix on, what fell off, why did it fall off. So when businesses get shooken, you know, and you look at what's actually standing after the storm passes, is what you got to reevaluate to work on, what landed. If you don't have the right foundation, that's where a wipeout can come. And that's sometimes where I don't think God's gonna, I mean, God is God. I can never limit him if he wants to punish out of a storm. But I think our approach as believers is to know that he's in control mostly.
Is there a recent storm that you can think of, maybe in the last, I don't know, few months or something, something recent that you can kind of paint a picture for some listeners, whether it's a big storm or small storm or,
I mean, the permit is probably one of the most current alive storms as a business owner that we're in. And we're tackling, so we're in probably an F5 tornado.
The category.
I think that's a category.
Yeah.
I think it's EF. I think they changed that categorization of tornadoes now. But we're in a big tornado right now as we speak, and how I'm operating is exactly how I'm supposed to approach a tornado. Go look for shelter and survive. So there's more spiritually on how to handle that, but there was keys and components that we'll talk about that basically helped us understand what was coming and what type of storm and being ready for it. But yeah, I mean, current live storm right now is the islands is already challenging to get products here. Inflation has rose incredibly post COVID, right? With land and market of real estate and interest rates, inflation, lack of inventory, all these things take a strong play on our market. And so what that means is we used to get a lot of calls we would get calls every day, all day. And I'd have a full-time person just answering the phone, man. It was just like it was awesome. God was blessing. But if interest rates are really high, it's not a season to go buy. It's not a season to refinance. So that just eliminates two different markets for us. Then people aren't remodeling, they're not extending, they're not doing these things. And then inventory is really low. So, it's a little island, it's kind of already all built out. So if you're not renovating or remodeling, you're not building. And then that kind of lacks, the reach for market. And then on top of that, you have a luxury market, which we strategically placed ourselves. And with people who don't refinance and have the funds and just buy land, you're still dealing with lack of inventory, inflation on product. Since COVID, and you have the Department of Permitting basically taking 2 years to get their plans through, and they're having their own struggles in storm, or maybe it's smoke, but they're having their own. We're having a storm because of it, because just everyone's just not renovating, remodeling, or building because of all these different factors. So currently going through that storm.
So it seems like ATN has been through a bunch of storms, and I'm assuming also snakes and smokes. But particularly with storms, there's going to be small Manini ones and like big ones, right? How would you, or what's your advice to people that are going through the small ones, and what's your advice to people that are going through like major, foundation shaking type storms?
Yeah. So from a practical level, I believe that you got to identify, number one, if you categorize you're in a storm, by looking at all three categories I shared, and you say, man, this is definitely a storm. It's out of my control. There's nothing I can do. There are 4 indicators, discernment indicators and application indicators that I would advise that we use. And it's based off my childhood experience in storms, growing up in the Midwest. I was like one of those kids that loved, we had a basketball rim that you can adjust. I put it just at the level to where I can dunk it. Who didn't,
Who didn't? Yeah.
And then I would get a little bit smaller ball so I can palm it. And then we used to have dunk contests, and it would be super fun. I was probably, 6th grade and acting like I'm Sean Kemp. That's my age, y'all. So, but doing these, we'd be outside playing as a kid. No phones, we didn't, too many game systems back then, so we're always outside. And so we had to be back home by the street lights, so that's all normal. And while we're playing, sometimes we would realize, like, wait a minute, it's getting kind of like, you could feel it. Like the moisture in the air changes. It's sometimes a little warmer, a little cooler. The wind starts changing. You just feel this. You could feel it. Like a storm's coming, you just know. You've been around it. It's just, you have that, like, you just know the wind, you look at the clouds, you You can tell it's getting a little bit dark. They're kind of doing this wavy blow thing that's not normal. And you're just like, okay, storm's coming. But as kids, you don't go run for shelter. And you don't care how big it is. You're trying to get your last hour of playing. Mm-hmm. So when you would hear thunder, it was official. Okay, it is a storm.
It's time to go home.
Well, no, we still wouldn't go home.
Oh.
Because we learned this rule, like when you hear thunder, you see lightning, you do this little count, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. And then if you see the lightning, or if you see the lightning and you do it and you hear the thunder, that's how far
away. By mileage, right?
By mileage. Yeah. So we wait till the last second because we want to maximize our time, right? To go playing. But, hearing the thunder and then seeing the lightning right before the rain, we would time it pretty good, pretty like on point.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes hell would fall on us. That would be crazy. But so we go back inside, and then in the Midwest, I was in the city, so we didn't get like the tornadoes hit us. Uh-huh. We'd hear about the tornadoes outside of us, but we would get slammed with the thunderstorm part of it, right? And it would hit so hard, you would hear like small debris come and slam into the window. You would see trees fall. You would see electrical wires fall, and it was just it was kind of a fun experience. The next day when the storm passed, we would go outside as kids, grab our bikes. There'd be fire trucks, and
it sounds super fun. Like I'm imagining now, it'd just be cool to just go on your bikes with the boys, just like.
Bro, it was. We'd get on our bikes. There'd be smashed cars with trees. I mean, it was like a war. It was like a war scene, and it would happen, 3 or 4 times a year. It was like. And we just want to go see all the damage. Obviously, it was just that childlike faith, not thinking about it like an adult. But yeah, just having that childlike faith, man, and not looking at it like, the destruction or the panic or worrying about your house getting, slammed or whatever by the wind and the destruction. But then looking at it as an adult too, now that I'm older, is like, dang, you're hoping you're kind of going to a little more of a panic or a little worry, like, man, I hope my car doesn't I don't got to worry about insurance, or I hope, everyone's safe. I'm so sorry about Jim across the street where his truck got smashed. I can't imagine what he's going through. There's the whole adult side of looking at it too, and the responsibility of like trying to protect your assets and people and everyone's safe. So, when you're young, you don't think about those things, but it really made me think about like the balance of. And this is to answer your question, what would I share to the people that in different levels of storms is I do believe that we want to address it with a balance, with a heart or like a childlike faith, but also an adult stewardship, like there's a balance of doing all you can do, but at the same time have a faith aspect, knowing that God's in control of all things, and just having that faith understanding, like, hey, it will pass, and in whatever happens, God allowed it, and we'll have to address it when the time comes.
We didn't have the luxury to panic, and that's regarding one of the stories in the book. I don't know if you want to touch up on that, but the main thing is that's crazy because sometimes people can choose to panic, but because of your alertness to the situation, we didn't have time to panic. Just means you got to move quick, right? And this is one of the aspects of responding to a storm. But can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so naturally, you need to get your physical body in a place of peace. And an absence of a storm, if I were to say anything, the absence of a storm isn't what creates peace. It's Jesus's presence, which I think the builder of all things presence. So you're thinking, how's that even practical? Well, it's not the absence of a storm that creates peace. It's the presence of the builder of all things. And so the storm, a good example in the Bible that's very similar is there was disciples with Jesus. Jesus set the GPS, told them, I use GPS, basically like the coordinates saying, hey, we're going to go across this body of water. Let's get in the boat. We got somewhere to be. And if God sets the coordinates in your life, He gives you vision for your business, you're riding with builder of all things, and you have Him on your boat, meaning in your business, and you're operating with, understanding He's the owner and you're a steward. That's why that part comes first. You're stewarding and He's on the boat with you. If He's setting the coordinates and you're on the stream, which we've talked about, right? Yep. And you're going down and there's a storm, the way you react, it should be like the adult in stewardship, but also like the kid in faith. You see, Jesus in this story he was asleep.
Yeah.
I think it's Mark 4:28. I think he was asleep on a cushion, on a pillow, relaxed. And so the adult side of these guys on the boat was the panic because there's a storm hitting, man. There's waves hitting the boats, getting shaken. They're losing their sense of foundation. Jesus is there on the stern. That's their foundation, but they're getting shaken right now to kind of see where their faith is. And so what do? Is they wake him up, and then Jesus look and say, ye of little faith. And then he speaks, be still. He speaks to the storm and it stops. And then they recognize who he is. Oh, he's the builder of all things.
Yeah.
Like even the winds and the waves obey. And that's the story, right? So when I say the absence of the storm doesn't create peace, it wasn't the idea of the storm going away that creates peace, because then there will always be another storm. So you can't rest in just getting through the storm alone. So it's like if you're homeless and you can sit there and worry about, am I going to eat tonight? And then you feel like peace doesn't come just naturally just from getting food, because then tomorrow you might have to go through the same struggle.
Yeah.
The peace comes knowing where you're getting the food from and if it's consistent. Like if if you're getting, oh, wait a minute, I have a consistent source to get this food. Or maybe I got a job and now I can have faith I'm constantly going to get, being able to get these resources to have a place to sleep and eat. It's the same thing that's where the peace comes, is knowing that the builder of all things was on the boat with you. He's in the business with you. He's in the storm with you. And when you have that understanding and that kind of faith, then that produces the peace that I'm talking about.
Fear will whisper worst case scenarios. And as human beings, that's tough, because I feel like that happens to a lot of people because we're just not used to building that muscle, that how to respond muscle, I guess. And same thing what happened with the guys on the boat. That's the first thing that probably came up in their minds, right? Like, what is the worst case scenario? We're gonna drown. We're gonna fall. This boat's gonna ship. How do you approach that? And what's your, I want to say tactic, but how do you approach something like that for people that aren't,
Oh, okay. Trust the process. So you still have to have faith in a storm. There's no way around it. You see it in movies all the time that are not spiritual. There's a Godzilla's flying a truck at you and the guy's praying behind the truck. Faith comes out in fear, man. Like, now I don't want to say faith comes out in fear, but I want to say the God that you didn't think existed comes out in fear. You could be an atheist, but as soon as you're about to die, you're going to cry out to God. You know what I mean? And that's pretty standard. What we see as human beings is like when you're in those circumstances. So faith is always going to take, or your trust in something is always going to take place. But practically, man, like I say that to say that God, whether you believe in him or not, is parenting and teaching you and carrying you along your path your whole life. And when you have a storm that he's allowing, you have to trust the process as much as you can, because that's all you have, right? Whatever you have is resources, whatever you've learned. So you have to react and trust the process. If you react out of panic, you're not going to abide by the process. That's military, right? Military trains you to just trust what you're trained to do. And trust you'll get through it. And I think it's any little thing that we're in business, man. When you put a process together, you have to fully fulfill it and trust it. And then if it doesn't work, you come back like, what did the storm knock off? You'll never know if you don't fully go through with the process.
That's good.
And then in the midst of it, be okay to pivot. Like if the process is to run to the shelter, underground shelter, open the doors, and you're running and then there's a flying roof panel flying at you, you're not just gonna let it hit you because my SOP says run to that. Right. So you got to be ready to pivot too. So a lot of times you'll have to pivot and just trust your instincts in the moment, man. And it's really just trusting the process in a full degree. But there are ways I've put discernment triggers that I've learned to apply, that people can apply. And I think it starts with how to recognize a storm, where you're at in the storm, and then how to respond to those.
That's good. I like that we're here because in a portion of the chapter, it talks about you and Tiffany's kind of, not revelation, but something like you mentioned, you have to go through the process in order to find out, what needs to be worked on, or what muscles need to be built up, or what needs to be cut off. There's one portion that it's I think this is probably the best one for myself, which was the power of waking Jesus out of faith and not fear. And it says, fear says, do you care? Like, you're waking up Jesus, like, don't you care? Like, there's a storm. That's out of fear, right? But versus waking Jesus up and saying, hey, Jesus, we need your help, or whatnot. And I think that perspective change, or that line here is just helped me shift. Your it kind of shows your what you need to work on, or what you should continue to work on, which is waking him up out of trust and knowing that he's going to take care of it, or you're panicking, you're waking him up, Yeah. And I thought that was so good. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, looking at the story, I've heard a lot of, people in the faith say, they failed by waking him up. Like, they should have just kind of laid on the pillow with him, which,
interesting. Okay.
And so, like, not waking him up and just having faith and riding it out. But then that's like taking the horn, by yourself, right? Yeah. And so I think waking him up was key. Like, I think that's what he wanted. I think he wanted you to wake him up, but not wake him up out of fear.
That's good.
Wake him up out of faith. And in circumstances I'm in this is real spiritual, and relationship is where, you get into a storm, and I'm going to trust the processes and do everything I know to do with the boat, the business, to keep it afloat. But I won't shy away from, I'll immediately get in my closet and pray to wake him up, wake him up out of faith. So the way I deliver my prayer is not out of fear, it's out of faith. I know you're going to, take care of us in this storm. I know you're going to do this, but I want to show you that I know that, and that's my relationship to him, is just actively, verbally praying already what I believe is going to happen, and praising him for it already before it does. So it's a faith movement, right? On waking up Jesus is, I want to say this, man, don't think about, you want to try to balance, or not even balance, but you want to wake them out of faith, not fear. But at the end of the day, just wake them up, man. You know what I mean? Like, don't not wake him up. Don't try to take the helm and run the ship on your own. If I were to close with anything, man, I don't care if you're screaming, cussing, you're in your garage, you're out in an open field, and you just cannot handle the storm or the weight you're in, and it's way out of your control. Whatever it is, wake him up. Wake him up. Whether it's fear, pain, whatever it is, just scream and just say, Jesus, wake up, I need you. Builder of all things. The guy, when we say builder of all things, we're saying he's the builder and creator and designer and ultimate, like, just operator of everything that we rest our feet on daily, and gravity and universe. If he is like holding all these things together and allowing the earth to just rotate so perfectly, in the balance between the sun and how far we are. I mean, just thinking about Antarctica and below. If you look at, like, it's frozen on the top and bottom of the axis, and then it's at this perfect temperature in Hawaii at like 70, 80, 90 degrees. The pivotal point of that possibility is so pinpoint exact in the universe for survival, that he's operating for storms to constantly cleanse and repair and replenish the earth. That when it's the same thing in our lives, that we have to have storms to replenish, to redirect, to reroute, to rebuild. And so when a storm comes, praise God. And it sucks, but wake him up. Wake him up. That's what he's waiting on. Wake him up. When you wake him up, he will calm it. And then he'll give you what you need to rebuild. For those guys on the boat, they needed to work on their faith. Right?
Yeah.
He just told them what they need to work on. Ye little faith.
That's true.
That's what you need to work on.
That's true. Yeah.
That's what the storm was for. That's what you need to work on. Wake them up.
Wake them up.
Wake them up.
Can you talk about preparation and positioning?
Yeah. With my experience in, Peoria, Midwest, growing up there before I came to the islands, and those things I shared with, about, recognizing the wind and then hearing the thunder, and then you see the lightning, and then comes the rain. There's like an order there, right? And so I felt like recognizing, number one, you're in a storm or a storm's coming, and then recognizing where you're at in the storm. Like, are you at tier 1, 2, 3, or 4 kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
So what I've naturally, have done this, but now I'm just trying to like define it, is there's two parts to the wind. The wind is first, like I was saying, it's like there's a feeling. You feel wind. You don't see it, but you feel it.
Yeah.
And there was the moisture change, and there's just something you could feel. And I really believe that there's two things that happen, is just you've had enough experience in your business, trade, and life that there's an intuition that develops naturally, yes. Right? And I would say when the wind happens, like when I was a kid, pay attention. Doesn't mean run back in the house, like we're playing a game, but be aware, don't ignore it, and sometimes it's actually God speaking to you too. It's not just, you may have no experience in that situation, and God will give you that same feeling, that same kind of intuition. That's what we call the Holy Spirit, right? So he'll speak to you that way as well. But that wind comes, I think, pay attention, like I have that experience all the time with, in a lot of situations where I can just feel like we need to email the client. Nothing else says why do it right now or like before the day ends, but follow those leadings. There's this little can't explain it. You can't pinpoint it. It's just pay attention. So that would be my first key, is recognize if you feel something, there's a reason why. And doesn't mean you have to have the answer yet, but go ahead and note it, pay attention, and be aware.
That's good.
That's like number one. Don't just throw it off. Like when the moisture changes, the wind, and you kind of see the clouds doing a little something different, then okay, we're watching you. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
just record it.
Yeah. So that would be my first indicator. And typically, like when that kind of thing happens and you don't really have any processes in place, I would take worst case scenarios, work backwards, and create SOPs for risk limitations, right? Risk awareness on what you would do, right?
Business gems.
Yeah, sorry, we're getting into business gems, but I mean, be ready for every type of storm, right? If it's a tornado, where are we gonna go? And if the tornado goes right over our head, you like have a vision of worst case scenarios and already put tactics and SOPs. SOP just really means instructions and a process to get from A to Z. That's all it means, right? It's just, okay, A is stand up, and that's a procedure actually. What we really want to do is get over there to that shelter, open the doors, and get in. That's what we need to do. And in business, we like to type out everything, man. Like, you got to stand up, walk 10 feet. And I think that's a little too much information, but when you're building these, it's very important to have these. So even when the wind kicks in and your intuition kicks in, you could sometimes determine what kind of storm could be. And then you already kind of, okay, if this, just kind of taking that mental note, and that, okay, like if it is I feel like the permitting is taking a little bit longer than usual, and if that's the case, what could happen? People could stop doing work. If that happens, okay, I need to start doing podcasts with people that are connected to making decisions with bills that have to do with DPP. That was an intuition thing. I don't have to sit there with the mayor and certain people, but I made an intuition. I feel it coming and want to be a part of the solution, not just hang out on the problem. I'm already doing some work based on intuition, right? And so that's what births those things, It's like, why would, am I trying to, create scenarios of surviving outside of, I'm pivoting now. Okay, what kind of projects where we don't need permitting, and so you just got to think, okay, worst case scenario, even everything's all good now, everything might not be all good when the storm comes.
Right.
So indicator number 2 is what I call the thunder. It's like, once you hear that rumble, you're like, oh man, it's kind of official now. Like, there is a storm, doesn't mean it's going to hit you, but there's definitely a storm now. Right. Yeah. So hearing it is like, is it affecting you yet, or is it just noise that it's out there but not affecting you? And so when you hear the thunder, it's like when I read a magazine article about the DPP is taking longer than usual. I'm now hearing the noise. It's not just an intuition anymore. Now I'm speaking to other, I'm out there with another colleague, and he's like, man, is your permit taking a while? Because it's like taking us almost a year now. The architect starts I see in emails, and and just the noise is getting real, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, like there is a storm out
it's
there.
approaching
It's
you.
approaching,
It's approaching
or
you.
it's out on the outskirts of me. It's not affecting me yet, but it's on the outskirts. So when that starts happening, that's when we just start doing our preparation at tier 2 now. Like a little more, it's real. Give the team heads up, like, hey, projects might not start. It's okay to integrate a little bit of that awareness. There's a storm, just like storms do. They put the little indicators on the TV back in the day. Says there's is warning, or
or the floating banner.
Yeah. So same kind of thing in business and how you approach certain things. But then when you see the lightning, it's collectively, it's something you could see now, and that's when the lightning is when you actually start seeing it affecting you. So it's not in the outskirts anymore. Lightning is like, okay, it's hitting ground.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's no longer just in the sky. It's touching the earth. It's like, and then it's approaching too, right? And so now that it's affecting you, maybe your profit margins are losing a little bit. Maybe your sales aren't hitting what you're starting to see it, like affecting you. And so when those indicators happen, it's time for shelter. It's time for protecting your business. It's time to stop investing. It's time to kind of like let the team know, like, hey, things like this is a storm. It could still like pass us, but it could like it's a real storm now. It's touching ground. It can hit us dead on. So, and then the last one's the rain. So if you could be a business owner, family, marriage could be in the middle of this right now. That's when you're in the storm. And if you didn't prepare for those indicators, it is what it is. And if you're in the storm right now, it's not too late. Like, you still can wake up the builder of all things. It's not too late. You know what I mean? So sometimes it's good to have these indicators and to like pay attention, and then start, prepping teams to understand it could be. And when it is happening, just start putting your processes in place and get your shelter and ready for the storm. But when the rain comes and you're in it, man, that's when it's all fate. You can imagine, like in Twister, when the storm was hitting, it was just, once they're at the shelter, man, they're just holding each other and hope they don't blow away. You know what I mean? It's like the rain is when you're in it, but when you're in it, and that's what those disciples on the boat were. They were in it. And so they had to make a choice on whether to try to control it from there, or to wake up the builder of all things to just kind of seize the day. And so, just going back on what I said, man, that peace doesn't come from the absence of the storm. It comes in the presence of the builder of all things, is where you get to really rest peacefully in understanding that he is in control of the storms that come. He is the one that's in control of allowing it to begin in the first place. So if he's in control of allowing it to pass and to stop it, like everything in the middle, as much as it sucks, it's going to shake your foundation and all the things that need to fall off, so you know what you got to fix. And if it shuts you down, then praise God. Because Paul in Acts 27 was on a ship, let's call it a boat, it's going off, and that storm hit them. That boat didn't survive. But not one person was injured on that ship. Every single one, I shouldn't say injured, I'm pretty sure they had scratches and broken arms, but they all survived. Not one died for sure. They all made it to land. They had to swim, but they all made it. Every single one accounted for. So sometimes even the boat will sink, but you weren't meant to do a business at that time, or that type of business in that time. And that's acceptable, right? And so either way, at the end of the day, God, when there's a storm, he is shaking you, trying to see what you need to work on. And sometimes it's not to destroy or to shake. Sometimes it's just to reroute. Redirect. Like sometimes the storm's right there and you just can't go forward no more. Like, oh, we got to go this way then. Let's dodge the sword. So sometimes it's just to pivot you, and get you in a new direction.